Welcome to ParaTruth. Welcome to ParaTruth Reborn. This is a pre-recorded show on 107.7 FM New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. My name is Erik.
And I'm Justin.
And today we have joining us for the first time, Tim Rayborn. He's an acclaimed and prolific writer of books on various topics. In fact, he's written nearly 50 books for 8 publishers about music, the arts, history, the paranormal, mythology, how-to books, and several other topics as well. In addition, he works as a ghostwriter, editor, and a book coach. He lived in England for nearly 7 years and has a PhD from the University of Leeds. He's also an internationally acclaimed musician who plays dozens of unusual instruments, including medieval instrument reconstructions and folk instruments from Northern Europe, the Balkans, and the Middle East. He has appeared on over 40 recordings, and his music wanderings and tours have taken him across the US, all over Europe, as well as Canada and Australia. His recent books include Sip and Sensibility, an inspired literary cocktail collection, Northern Mythology, The Scary Book of Valentine's Day Lore, and The Scary Book of Christmas Lore, which we have the pleasure to dive into today. So without further ado, Tim, welcome to ParaTruth. Tim, we're excited to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We've been pretty excited. I found your book actually online. It was an advertisement on Facebook.
Okay.
Of all
Great.
things, and I was like, "Oh, what is this?" How to check it out because we love the Christmas lore stuff. We've done a couple shows on it over the years, just him and I.
Cool.
So finding someone more of an expert in this thing was like, "Oh, we got to do this. We can't pass it up." But our first question here is probably one that you get pretty often, and that's just what inspired you to write a book on scary Christmas lore.
Well, it's interesting. I've always had like an interest in folklore and folk tales and also paranormal and cryptids and those kinds of things. So I've done work for this publisher, Cider Mill, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, on various things. I wrote a book on an anthology of paranormal stories. I wrote a book about it's called The History of the End of the World, which is like apocalyptic stories from around the world. I've written a book about conspiracy theories, so I have a track record of writing for them. They actually approached me about this. They actually emailed me and said, "Hey, we want to put out this new book, and it's going to be all of these sort of terrifying, gory horror Christmas stories. Are you interested in writing that?" So I jumped at the chance, absolutely. So it wasn't something I necessarily came up with, but when they approached me about it, I was delighted to actually do it for them. So it was great.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, had you ever looked into this kind of stuff before for the Christmas lore? I mean,
yeah, I have a couple of really good books on Krampus and on the celebrations there, and I also have a long interest in sort of Nordic and Germanic mythology and such, where a lot of these creatures kind of come from. So yeah, it was a good fit. I think it's one of the reasons they asked me to do it was simply that it was something I already had an interest in. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Krampus is one of our favorites, and I think both Erik and I would love to see the Krampus festivals anywhere, whether it's here in the U.S. or in Europe.
Do you hold on? Let me get. I think I have it here. I'll show you. There's a book you should know about, and of course I can't find it now, and it should be right in front of me, and of course I don't see it. Give me 1 second here, and there's a really excellent book on Krampus that you should have in your. Oh, here it is, in your library. If you don't, it's called Krampus and the Old Dark Christmas.
Ooh,
it's
okay.
like the definitive book on. It's filled with just gorgeous. I'm showing somebody else's book here now, but it's got these amazing, photographs of all the festivals from Austria and Germany and Italy and such. So yeah, highly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, I'm putting that down in my notes right now.
Krampus, the Krampus and the Old Dark Christmas is the name of it. So yeah, great stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So speaking of, not really Krampus per se, but there are quite a few popular creepy lore stories that have been in circulation over the years. And Krampus, of course, is one of the most popular. I think our very first Christmas episode, oh goodness, like 15 years ago, was on Krampus. So it's like,
Okay.
he's just blowing up ever since.
Yeah, it was just getting started then, really. This kind of so
yeah, for sure. But when doing the research for the book, were there any specific entities that just really stuck out to you that you're like, oh my gosh, this is awesome?
There's some great ones. Everybody, Krampus has become much more well known, but there's a whole body of kind of lore and folk tales about all these different creatures that come from Germanic mythology and from even farther afield. So there's a whole bunch. Krampus, of course, is the most famous, and if for any of your listeners that don't know, it might be worth actually explaining a little bit about Krampus to begin with, because people may not know. Krampus is a sort of kind of goat-faced or goat-bodied demonic creature that accompanies Saint Nicholas in the festivals, and his whole purpose is basically to punish people who have been bad. And as you well know, he carries like these big birch sticks and has a sack, and any child that's been bad, he will whack them and throw them in there and drag them away, with the implication being that he might actually kill them or eat them or something. We don't really know, but there's a whole lot of traditions of this in the Alpine regions, in Germany, Austria, parts of France, Italy, all the way through. It's a really deep lore sort of thing for the folk traditions there, that every Christmas he accompanies Saint Nicholas, who is the chief gift giver in a lot of these ancient German tales. And Nicholas himself has some really interesting stories, because Nicholas was an actual saint, an actual Greek Orthodox saint that lived in what is now more modern Turkey in the 3rd century, I believe, 2nd, 3rd century. And there's some really interesting kind of horrific stories about Nicholas as well. So there was an attempt at some point to combine what is probably a pagan pre-Christian lore about this goat creature with a Christian Catholic sort of saint, and combine them into one thing. So American Krampus celebrations, you'll often see focus more just on the monster itself, but the Germanic ones in Austria and Germany almost always have like this Catholic underpinning to them as well. There's always a Saint Nicholas there, a fellow who looks kind of like Santa Claus with a big beard and the bishop's mitre and the staff and that, but they always appear together. They're kind of inseparable. Krampus is the dark side of Nicholas, basically, and they're like two sides of the same coin, the yin and the yang, basically. So they always appear together in the old Germanic celebrations that you find that are still done in folk customs in the villages and such of Switzerland and Austria and Germany. Now there are bigger celebrations now that have become more like the Krampus celebrations we see in the United States, where the focus is more on Krampus himself. But from its origins, it always had this strong sort of connection with Nicholas, which I find quite interesting as well, because Nicholas is another version of Santa Claus. He's a gift giver. He's the jolly fellow that brings candy and toys to children, but he's accompanied by this dark demonic creature, it's just interesting that they sit side by side with each other in so much of Germanic folklore. Yeah.
Mm.
So since you brought up Saint Nicholas, this is one of my questions. Many believe that Odin is where the Santa Claus legends kind of originates. Is it in your opinion that that they kind of merged Odin and Saint Nicholas to create this new character, Santa Claus?
No, it's actually a misconception. This Odin as Santa Claus thing has been going around for the last 5 years, and as one of my specialties is Nordic mythology, and it drives me up the wall because it's actually not true at all. So
okay, well, I'm glad to set the record straight.
Set the record straight. No, it's BS, and it kind of drives me nuts. There's been a number of really good scholarly articles on it that have completely dispelled that as being anything. What does kind of resemble Santa Claus in some way are some of the Finnish myths, actually, from northern Finland, among the Sami, who are the indigenous people, and there are holy men and holy women in those traditions. They're called Noyade, I think, and they're kind of like shamans. They're like the holy people of the Sami, the indigenous people of the Arctic, and some of them were known to wear like red cloaks or red shirts or red coats and such. And there's a whole thing about that the Sami actually build temporary housing very similar to sort of Central Plains native teepees. They're sort of built in the same kind of way, with sort of skins stretched around in these kind of sort of teepee type shapes. And you would tend to enter them during the winter. You would enter them through the top. So you have this guy in a red cloak or a red cape entering down through where the fireplace lets out, and there's various interesting things about it. He might bring gifts of food and reindeer meat and drink to people and such to help them out, or to give them spiritual assistance in the middle of the winter. So there's some theory that at least in part, the Santa Claus that we have now was influenced by Finnish immigrants coming to America in the 18th and 19th century and bringing some of these traditions of like this gift-giving holy man, from the far north. So that to me seems more likely than a connection straight up with Norse mythology.
Well, we had done a Santa Claus episode where supposedly like the Amanita mushrooms were supposedly a part
There's
of
some
the colors.
theories about that, because they're red with little white speckles on them and they're hallucinogenic, and it's possible that some of the holy men of the Sami community use them in rituals and such. So there is a possible connection there, and the notion of like flying through the air and making the sort of shamanic journey through the air with flying animals and such. Now there is a connection there because with Norse mythology, because Odin does indeed ride an 8-legged steed named Sleipnir, a horse that can fly. So there is some connection, but that suggests more that the Norse mythology was influenced by that rather than having any influence on Santa Claus or the other myths. It was like it came toward that as well as rather than going toward it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There are theories about that the psychedelic mushrooms may play a role in that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, do we typically see like a pretty clear connection between the various Santa Clauses throughout various cultures, or is there like significant difference between some of these guys?
It's interesting. Yeah, I think like the Nicholas one is very much from sort of Catholic countries, and particularly Catholic Germanic places like Bavaria and Austria and such. But he also shows up in the Netherlands as well. There are other kind of gift-giving entities as well that exist. But a lot of them, I think, certainly if you're looking beyond Europe and such, a lot of them have been more influenced by the American Santa Claus than anything else, the Coca-Cola Santa Claus, basically, But there is a funny one that, like in Japan, for instance, Japan is a Buddhist and Shinto country, but they love the kind of tacky trappings of Christmas. They go all in for Santa and the trees and all that kind of stuff, and it's a big deal there. They really full on adopted the American style Christmas. And one of the versions of Santa Claus that they have literally looks like an American Santa Claus, though it would be a Japanese man, but he literally has a pair of eyes in the back of his head, like literally stuck in the back of his head, so that they can see what children are doing behind his back. And it's just kind of creepy. It's kind of unnerving. So yeah, there are drawings of the Santa who's supposed to be this jolly character, and he's got these kind of a pair of creepy eyes in the back of his head. So they have to kind of like Japanify it a little bit and make it. The other thing I always find amusing about Japan is one of the big Christmas dinner traditions is Japan is eating at Kentucky Fried Chicken, and people will book a reservation at KFC like months in advance so that they can actually go and eat there. It's just one of those cultural things I find really interesting.
I've heard that before, actually.
No idea how that happened. It kind of ties in with the joke about Jewish people, keeping Chinese restaurants open on Christmas Day so that they can order Chinese food. But it's funny that there's KFC apparently is a big part of Christmas dinner celebrations in Japan. I have no idea why. Your guess is as good as mine.
All right. So one of the legends that I found kind of interesting, because I don't remember if we've ever covered it before, was the Kagatillo. And I've never heard of the pooping log before. So can you tell us a little bit about Kagatillo and if the Catalans still practice this?
Let me see. Where was that? It's in the book, isn't it? Let me. Yeah. I don't keep all these things straight up in my head.
Well, no.
Oh, sure. Let me just expound. Yeah, sure.
It's towards the end.
It's been like 2 years since I wrote this book, so that's... Kagatillo, from Catalonia. Is that the weird little crapping statues?
Yeah, where they're shoving everything into.
Of course, we're going to talk about that. Of course.
Yeah.
we can't have the show without talking about that.
About the little crapping statues. Yeah. It's a bizarre thing, isn't it? The pooping log. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Where does that originate of? I have absolutely no idea. But basically, I'll even read a little bit for the people that might not know what it is. But Kagatillo is a small wooden log with a smiley face painted on one side, often propped up by 2 sticks on the face side. The back half is covered with cloth. Starting on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception on December 8th, children are expected to feed the log, quote-unquote feed the log, small bits of food, such as fruits and nuts, which are usually gone in the morning if the parents have done their job. They continue to feed Kagatillo throughout the season until the magic night of Christmas, and then something very special happens. The children leave the room for a while and pray for gifts and often warm sticks by the fire or heater. When they come back, they gather around Kagatillo again and sing songs to it. While singing, they gently beat the log with their small sticks. This is presumably to help the log with its constipation, because at some point the cloth is lifted and there at its backside, Kagatillo will have pooped out treats for the children, secretly left under the cloth while the children are out of the room, of course. And then they have various different kinds of things. They sing these crazy little, poop Tio, hazelnuts and nougats, pea white wine, do not poop herrings, they are too salty. Poop nougats. Poop almonds and nougats, and if you don't want to poop, I will hit you with a stick. Happy holiday? I don't know. Where does this come from? Nobody actually knows. It's a long, Turon has, one of the treats has long been a kind of holiday favorite in all of Spain, so it might have been known since the Middle Ages. But the idea of bringing a log of wood into homes, like the Yule log that we find in German traditions, is certainly a thing. So it's just an interesting thing that they developed this unusual thing where you have to feed it and then let it poop your treats out for you. I have no idea where that came from. Things are kind of lost to time, and maybe that's just as well. But it's a great little.
You have to wonder what they were on when they came up with that.
It's that really strong sherry.
They were clearly high. It had to be.
Well, like the Amanita mushroom connection to Santa Claus.
Maybe.
I mean, it feels tongue-in-cheek. It feels like something that somebody kind of started as a joke and it just kind of took off, It feels like
a good possibility.
Yeah, somebody thought, oh, this will be a laugh. Let's try this year. And then next year, everybody was doing it.
Speaking of jokes, there's actually this movie I watched last year. It was just called The Yule Log, and it's about a killer log that would sit in the fire, and then these teenagers who come up to this cabin to spend a weekend, and they just get slaughtered by this log who has a vendetta against people for some reason. It was I don't even know. Like, it was just the wildest thing.
I wouldn't want to be burned.
It was one of those movies. Like, I don't know who put the money into this and why they would have done that, but I couldn't walk away either. They had my attention. It was amazing.
Oh, excuse me. That's fantastic. Yeah. There's actually, I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's actually a fairly decent Krampus movie that came out about 5 or 6 years ago. It's just called Krampus. It's kind of a PG-13 contemporary horror film, but it's actually really entertaining. So check it out if you haven't seen it. It's worth, it actually follows the sort of lore of Krampus pretty well. It's worth seeing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've yet to see it. Eric shamed me last week about
It's like a Christmas tradition now for me.
Yeah. Oh, great. Fantastic. Glad to hear it. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's actually really cool, and it does a really good job of capturing some of the spirit of it, I think. So,
that's definitely one of those movies I think did really well. And it had more of a almost like a 1980s vibe, because it was horror, but it was also comedic at the same time.
Exactly. It had the kind
really
of
great
Kruger bribes or those kinds of things to it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking, of course, of Krampus and his, ability, I guess, to punish children, there is another entity that also tends to punish children, and it's one of my favorite creatures within Christmas lore, and that is the Yule Cat.
I love Yule Cat.
Yeah. Can you give us some details on the cat and how he's she, I don't know if it's a boy or girl cat, is associated with Christmas?
Yeah, just for reference, I'll pull it up. I actually did a little talk about Yule Cat not too long ago. I love this creature. This is an Icelandic tradition that probably dates back to at least the 18th century, if not earlier. There's every year in Reykjavik in Iceland, they put up a gigantic Yule Cat statue made out of lights. And if you go down to the city center, you can see this. People take pictures with it. It's this big cat. Yeah, you can look it up. If you just go to YouTube and Google Yule Cat Iceland, you'll see something of it. It's actually really cool. So it's deeply embedded in Icelandic folklore. Iceland is such a curious place because it was settled around the year 870. Nobody had lived there before. Maybe some Irish monks had lived there, but some Norse traders and people finally decided to move there and settle there, and there was no people there. So they brought all of their own culture and legends and myths and everything else with them, and that deeply kind of informed, what would happen there later. So Iceland is a fantastic country in some sense because the language modern Icelandic is more similar to the Old Norse language of the Vikings than any of the other Scandinavian languages. It even uses some of the same letters and such that were used after Christianization. So it's if you can speak modern Icelandic, you can read a lot of the Old Norse poetry like the Edda and such that tell the stories of Odin and Thor and such very clearly. So it's a little bit of a time capsule type society, which I find really interesting. About the Yule Cat itself, we don't quite know. Cats have some appearances in Old Norse folklore. There's the great goddess Freya is said to actually have a chariot that's drawn by two large cats, so it may have something to do with that. We don't know. But the Yule Cat itself is a really interesting creature. I like to read from it because that's the easiest way to sort of tell people about it. So the folk custom about the Yule Cat concerned children who did not finish doing their chores for the winter. And one of the traditions in old Icelandic customs, folk farm customs, is such as that children that did all of their work around the farm, around the house, whatever, would receive new clothes on Christmas. Now that's like a horror story for most kids, getting the ugly sweater that the Aunt Mabel sends you and having socks and whatever. But, if you think about it, if you're living in a very, very cold environment, warm new clothes are going to be very, very welcome regardless of your age. So the tradition is, let me see, for children living in the harsh, cold climate of Iceland, new winter clothing would have been most welcome. And they were expected to wear new clothing on Christmas night. Why did they do this? Because the Yule Cat would come and check up on them. This gigantic feline would creep into every farm and village on Christmas night and peer into each window to see what the children were wearing. If they'd been good, they would be adorned in their fabulous new Christmas clothes or have them at hand to show off. If the children had been bad, which meant they hadn't helped out, hadn't done all of their chores, and didn't have at least one new item of clothing to show for it, the cat would do two things. First, it would eat whatever dinner had been made for them so that they'd go hungry, but that was the least of their worries. Next, the cat would drag the children out of their homes and eat them as the main course. So written traditions about the Yule Cat only date back to the early 19th century, but the tradition is probably much older than that. It might just easily have been an invention of tired and worn out parents who needed the children to pull their own weight around the house. In addition, it seems to have become a tradition so that those who were better off would be mindful and thoughtful of those who were poorer than them. The poor might need the charity of some new, or at least new to them, clothing to stave off the dreadful fate of being snapped up by a ravenous monster cat lurking in the snowy wilds outside of their farms. So the cat would basically punish children. What it was saying is it was almost a parental way of saying you haven't done your chores and now the cat's going to come and eat you. But, again, it was in those kinds of societies, Iceland didn't have a really strong city or town structure until much, much later. So what you had were farm settlements and small villages. And so everybody had to pull their weight. Like if anybody slacked, that could affect the whole community. Food sources could be very scarce. And this is something I like to talk about in general, is people ask, why do these kind of Christmas horror stories, particularly in Europe and the North, exist at all? And one of the main reasons for that is I think we look at our modern life, we look at our world, and we look at winter, and if we're fortunate, we live in pretty comfortable houses that are well insulated so that when the temperatures drop down, I'm in Washington, it got into the 20s here last night. We had a lot of frost, it might even snow tonight. And that's it's cold, but it's comfortable for us. But I think we forget that in previous times, those long months between November and March, everybody risked starvation and death. You did not know if you were going to survive those months. And it didn't matter how much grain you had in, how many animals you might have slaughtered and smoked the meat for. There was still a decent chance that by February, your food stocks were going to be running pretty low. So we just go to the grocery store and load up again. But I think people lived on a much finer line between life and death in previous centuries, and we've forgotten about that. A friend of mine, another author, likes to say that basically all of us in these comfortable houses were still only about 6 inches away from death every night, because it's those walls that keep out the cold, they keep out everything. But people in earlier times would have been mindful for that. You need fuel to burn, you need fires, you need food to eat, you need fresh water, and these things were not guarantees between those months. So the winter brought with it the possibility of starvation, of famine, of death, of all of these things, of losing people. And I think a lot of these legends grow out of that idea. I think these monsters are almost sort of representations of those fears. Don't go into the forest because so-and-so might eat you is just as easily a way of saying don't go into the forest because you might get lost and freeze to death in a snowdrift, or the wolves might get you or something. So there was a real tangible struggle between life and death. And I think Christmas monsters, and they're winter monsters in general, some of them affect people through the whole winter, are a kind of personification of that. You know, they're kind of a representation in folklore and myth of how dangerous winter really was for the vast majority of people that didn't have money and couldn't live in decent housing. I mean, even in the Middle Ages, yeah, it wasn't great, but if you were wealthy, you could live in a castle and have tons of hearth fires, and you didn't usually have to worry about it because you had plenty of food. But somebody else who lived in a small farm, you had no guarantees. So the thing lurking in the forest just outside the edge of the village is also the danger of nature itself. It's a representation of how close they were to death at any given time. And I think that's an important way of looking at some of these stories, really.
I would imagine like a lot of those stories is kind of, I mean, to put the monster behind the, you know, the reality of cold weather and being lost in the woods without food and stuff. You know, I think that makes it a little more scary, especially for children, you know, and even myself, like, you know, I'm 38 years old. And if I go out in the woods at night and I start thinking of creepy monsters, I'm like, I'm pretty sure there's nothing out here, but my heart's racing and I'm getting a little more tense. And I'm like, I shouldn't be out here.
I think a natural evolutionary protective sense kicks in too, about that fear of the unknown, fear of the dark. You don't know what predators are out there, and we evolved for hundreds of thousands of years of self-preservation. So our imaginations do run away with themselves, and every little sound could be Sasquatch, or it could be the Beast of Bay Road, or whatever. You know? It could be a werewolf, a Sasquatch, a something, a demon. You know, so yeah, our imaginations get the better of us, but the threats are still real. Like you say, there could be wildcats or wolves or something else out there that would attack, you know. So yeah, there's a real danger to that.
100%. The one thing I kind of want to spin off this, Justin and I had actually just did a show last week that we aired about Christmas ghost stories. Do you think a lot of these monster lores kind of mesh with the Christmas ghost stories in some way?
It's an interesting thing because, like, ghost stories at Christmas were very popular in places like Victorian England. We always think of Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol, but it became kind of a tradition. There were a number of ghost stories that actually survived from that time. Actually, there's a whole bunch of people that wrote. His is the most famous by far, and a lot of them had those kind of morals to them, the morality, sort of, you know, the moral of this story is and such. But yeah, I think so. It's an interesting thing. There's because again, you're looking at a time, again, even in, say, England in the year 1850, if you were very poor, you might still starve to death over the winter, even if you lived in modern brick housing. You know, there was no guarantee. So I think the ghost, this kind of dark time of introspection was something that was more important in previous centuries. We find these days in the modern world, for better or worse, it's just go all the time. You know, we work straight through. Maybe we get a couple of weeks off at the holiday season around Christmas and before, and then January starts and we're right back. I think that there was a sense, and again, I'm talking mainly about Europeans. I don't want to speak to like Asia or anything else, but there was a sense certainly in the North in the winter holidays, the winter time, that it was a time of slowing down, a time of hibernation, and a time of introspection. And I think ghosts also represent that. They represent slowing down a little bit, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, thinking about the present, just as Dickens does in his book. And what do those things actually mean? Because it wasn't possible to necessarily work all the time through. Again, these days with our insulated office buildings and houses, people can just work 24/7, 365 days a year. But there were real cycles to human activity, and you were much more active in the summer, and in the winter you drew in and you hibernated a bit more, and the days were very short, so you didn't go out. So there wasn't a lot for laborers to do, and that was certainly true in the Middle Ages. Farmers, there was nothing to do if your fields are frozen over for a month. You can't do anything, so you're basically sitting around in your house in front of a fire. So I think the ghost stories kind of represent that, being mindful of your present situation, but also being more introspective about your past, what might yet come for you, what's coming in the year ahead, when you can actually step back out into warmer weather and start working again. I think a lot of this is very, very much tied to weather cycles and to human sort of, I don't know what's the word, there's a word for it, and it's escaping me at the moment, but sort of biological rhythms, biorhythms with the seasons and such. So this winter time is the time for thinking about, for drawing in and being more hibernatory, for being more introspective, for slowing down. And these kinds of stories are perfect for that sort of thing. You don't venture, as you said, into the woods in the winter. You are fearful that an angry ghost might come and visit you. It goes with the darkness of the season, the short days. And again, if you're talking about Northern Europe, we in the United States, I live fairly far north in the United States, but I used to live in England, and you get there and in Northern England, the sun's already setting at 3:30. You get farther north, you get up to a place like Trondheim in Norway, you've got about 4 hours of daylight. Reykjavik, there are points in Reykjavik in Iceland where you don't get much. Like the sun rises at about 10:30 and it starts setting again at about 2. So you have very, very short days. The sun is only very low on the horizon. So it's a time when darkness wins, when darkness is triumphant and people are scared and the weather is cold and you don't get a lot of sunlight. And so, your imagination can run wild with you with that sort of thing. It's the time when all the dark creatures come out to play for those few months and there's nothing you can do about it. So, yeah.
Kind of reminds me of the movie 30 Days of Night, and it takes place in Alaska.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a vampire's heaven, They can run amok for 24 hours a day. There are polar nights. The polar night can be like 6 weeks in some places far north. So certainly get up to northern Norway and Sweden or Svalbard. Yeah, you don't see the sun for 2 months. So now there weren't that many people that lived there, but for those that did, that would have very deeply affected their psychology. And conversely, in the summer, it's the opposite. In June, July, you don't have a day of dark for 6 weeks. It's sunlight all the time. It's 2 a.m. and it's broad daylight. So, and I remember that from even living in England. I lived in Yorkshire, and that the sun would set on solstice, June 21st. It would set at around 10:30. It would be sunset would be about, and then it would be right back up again at about 4:30. So you had maybe 6 hours of dark-ish. So by 5 a.m. in the north there, it's broad daylight. So it really changes how you think about the natural cycles, and it puts you more in tune with them, I think. So all of these stories, I think, are very much, at least in part, related to that, to the natural cycles of nature and our relation to them. And the winter represents fears. It represents that dark, like you say, going into the woods alone. It's a season of going into the woods alone, basically. So for a whole 3 months, 4 months. So
right. So a legend I had never heard of reading through the book was the Night Folk.
Oh yeah,
and I loved it because it's kind of like a parade through the night, and it was really interesting because it's like, if you don't leave your doors open, they're going to wreak havoc on your house and possibly you. So doing the book and going through this research, you mentioned in the book that it could be linked to kind of like the fairy folk legends in Ireland and stuff like that. In your opinion, is it more so linked to, because a lot of people believe we're closer to the veil being weaker during the winter months? Is it closer to more like the dead, like a dead parade?
Yeah, I think so. There's a number of those kinds of parades, isn't there? There's the night folk, there's the wild hunt, which is another one of the souls of the dead. It's the idea that at least on certain nights of the year in the dark, the dead do come back for whatever reason, and they're not necessarily benevolent toward humanity. They're
right,
dead, and they're eager to drag you along. So that, again, I see it as if you are caught out, you can be dragged into one of these things and sucked into it forever. That's like straight out of a horror story. It's like, you don't want to hear these people, these souls. You don't want to see, don't want to see them, and you sure as hell don't want them to see you. So if you hear it, just close the door and don't look, and that sort of thing. I'm always reminded of was it at the end of the first Indiana Jones film, Raiders of the Lost Ark, when the angel of death is released and Indy says, "Don't open your eyes, keep your eyes shut. You can't look at it." There's a kind of thing like that. If you see these things, you're seeing something that you as a mortal are not supposed to see. And if they see you, then that means they can suck you in. Now, the Wild Hunt itself does have traditions going back very old in Germanic traditions to the god Odin and to the parade of death and the night creatures. And several of the Christmas witches that are said to be parts of the Wild Hunt. And some of them have some of them are very benevolent, but some of them are really nasty. So the idea of disembodied souls, certainly we find that with Halloween. the old Samhain of the Celtic things that was their new year. That was the end of the old year and the beginning of the new. So on that night, the souls of the dead came back, and it was a dangerous time to be out. You pretty much wanted to let them have the run of the of the countryside and not be outside, because that, or it might be a time that you might try to commune with your own ancestors and actually welcome them. So you have both benevolent ancestors and malevolent spirits that would try to do things. So there are a number of both Germanic and Celtic myths about this time, when the sort of veil, as you say, between the worlds was thin, and spirits from the dead could easily cross over. So the night hunt, the night folk, the wild hunt, and those are the Germanic equivalents of those, but they're usually fairly sinister. You don't want to be caught up in them, or you could be swept up in them forever and become a part of it. And that's how they collect their new souls, basically, is people that get too close to them, people that see them, that hear them, or go out to try to catch a glimpse of them, and then they're sucked in, and they're now doomed forever to wander the earth once a year or twice a year or whatever in these parades, looking for more spirits to collect. So it ties in, I think, to the whole overall theme of darkness and physical darkness, and the idea of the unknown, of not knowing what's out there, and what might be waiting for you, what may be lurking for you in the darkness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, in regards to the wild hunt and others like it, what is the persuasion, I guess, on the spirit's part to kind of draw people out? You think people are just interested in the stories, they'd go looking for these creatures, or do you think there's some sort of I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but some sort of mysticism that kind of they use to draw people in?
It's interesting. Well, I think, isn't that one of the things, though? I think that you find this so often in these kinds of stories, and also in fairy tales and folk tales. There's a kind of what's the word? A temptation for the forbidden. Like, you tell somebody not to do something, there's a decent chance they're probably going to go do it, especially if it's a young kid. Oh, make sure you don't drive over 60 miles an hour, or they're going to go drive 85 miles an hour just to do it. I think it's the lure of the forbidden, the seeing something you're not supposed to see. We love mysteries as a human species, and being told that you can't see something or can't do it is going to make it that much more appealing in some ways. The idea with a lot of these certainly a lot of the original Grimm fairy tales are incredibly dark and gruesome, and they were meant in the same kind of way. They were to warn children not to go to the forest by themselves, not to talk to strangers. That was the point. They were teaching things. They weren't the happy Disney arrangements. They were like children go into the forest, and the old witch cuts their heads off and eats their entrails. The end. Basically that was
right.
So I think that the wild hunt, the night folk, the creatures of Samhain represent the kind of lure of the forbidden in some way. They represent some psychological level. They represent our intense desire for mysteries, and to solve mysteries, and to see things that we maybe aren't necessarily in our best interests, or at least if people are telling us that we shouldn't do it, we're going to rebel against that and do it anyway. And a lot of these stories are like, well, you can do that, but here's what's going to happen.
Right.
I think it's sure, you can break norms and take the risk, but on your head be it if something happens. Maybe you'll survive, but it's just like going out into the forest. Maybe you'll survive, but maybe a cougar will get you. We don't know.
Right.
It's your choice, man. You do what you want, but this is what could happen. You hear the wild hunt. Yeah, you can get, maybe they'll ignore you, but So I think there's a kind of societal warning that comes with that, about beware of the lure of the forbidden. Would be I think one of like the morals of those stories, definitely.
It almost seems like a lot of these stories, in some way or another, are kind of like parables, just ways to share some sort of truth in the most imaginative way is possible, right? Because that's what sticks to it. That's what we it might be hard to understand it at first, but it's the type of thing that you think of on a regular basis,
right?
And I think especially for children, it really feeds into that imagination. But when they grow up, it's like, okay, well, I see the reality now, and I understand why this story exists, and what it was trying to do to protect me.
Right. That's absolutely it. I think so. I think they're teaching tools in some ways for kids, and then also for adults. They stay with you, the lessons learned from them. Absolutely. Parable is a great way of describing it. Yeah.
Now, the other legend that I found fascinating throughout this book, again, because I had never heard of it before, was the Christmas werewolves. Apparently these werewolves were getting drunk.
Nothing says Christmas like werewolves, as far as Where did I put those? Let me refer to
I was
those.
gonna say it's close to the end
Yeah,
as well. So
spiders. Where is it? Oh my goodness, they're in here somewhere. They have to be in here. I know it. I remember what you're talking about. I don't see them right here. Hold on. Ghost Stories, 13 Yule Lads, Yule Cat. I'm looking at Polar Regions, Finland. I apologize here. I'll get this.
118, page 118.
Oh, page 118.
Yeah.
There you go. Winter Werewolves. That's right. Yeah, right. You can just edit this part out if you want. The damn book trying to find make it look like I at least know what I'm kind of sort of doing. Yeah, werewolves have a really interesting history, as you probably know, and you've probably done stuff on all sorts of crazy stories that dating back to like 16th, 17th century Germany. There were a number of werewolf trials and such, and of course the beast of Bray Road in Michigan and all of that. The modern werewolves that people claim that they've seen are really creepy, and it's really interesting. So I find them really fascinating. There's a lot of traditional folk. What is it? I love this. Yeah, traditional folk belief in Germany, Italy, and Romania held that if one was unfortunate enough to be born on Christmas Day, especially at the stroke of midnight, one was at a far higher risk of becoming a werewolf, because that day was set aside for Christ alone, and no one else should be born. Not like you can control that. I mean,
right. Well, any more than you can control being a werewolf and becoming a wolf.
Exactly.
From a curse.
Exactly. There's a good parallel there. Yeah. What is it? The night of St. Lucy, December 13th, St. Lucia, Santa Lucia, was thought to be a especially likely time for werewolves to appear, whether it was a full moon or not. And I find that interesting as well.
Yeah.
We find it was the Swedish cleric Olaus Magnus in 1555 wrote. He was talking about Lithuania. On the feast of Christmas, at night, such a multitude of wolves transformed from men gathered together in a certain spot, arranged among themselves, and then spread to rage with wondrous ferocity against human beings. And those animals which are not wild, that these natives of these regions suffer more detriment from those than they do from true and natural wolves. For when a human habitation has been detected by them, they besiege it with atrocity, striving to break down the doors, and in the event of their doing so, they devour all the human beings and every animal that is found within. They burst into the beer cellars, and there they empty the tons of beer or mead and pile up the empty casks one after another in the middle of the cellar, thus showing their difference from natural and genuine wolves. I find that fascinating. They're going to kill everybody, and then we're just going to go drink beer.
Well, and that's what fascinated me about the story. I mean, Christmas werewolves in and of itself, but then reading, and then in one legend they got drunk, and I'm like, wait, what?
Well, again, I think it's an interesting thing because the werewolf legend itself is kind of about the what makes a human and an animal, and what if you are both? What do we all have an animal within? Do we all have that ferocious, raging creature within? Do we let that animal out? Do we let that darkness in? I think werewolves speak very much to that idea that there is. And that speaks deeply to our own evolutionary psychology and our own. We are all animals originally. We all derive from primates, and we are primates, and we all have those animal instincts within us. Do we let those out? Do we, what does that mean? And people were very afraid of that, of primal instincts. So the werewolf represents a sort of losing one's self, losing one's humanity. But I think what makes this interesting is the drinking of the beer shows that there's still a human element there. And that's what differentiates them from being true animals. They're not, what makes the werewolf an abomination in sort of the thought is that it's not fully wolf or fully human. It's something monstrous. It's in between. It's in what they call a liminal space. So you have a wolf behind you, I see, right now.
This is one of my hellhounds, yes.
Leads the wild hunt, yes.
Yeah.
But there's an uneven space between humanity and animals that werewolves inhabit that makes people very uncomfortable. What are they? Are they both? But I think the idea of this is that you have wolves breaking down the social norms and people breaking out the social norms by becoming wolves, but then they savagely attack their own people. They're turning their backs on humanity by becoming wolves, and they're slaughtering them. They're eating them. This is the thing of any werewolf film you'll see is this. I think all the great werewolf films that we've seen over the years is they kill people, they eat them. They've turned their backs on humanity to sort of cannibalize their own. But then at the end of this, they all sit down and drink beer, which is a very human act. So it's a weird and unsettling sort of, placement. They sit side by side. They're animals who have ferociously ripped out the throats of their victims, but then it's Miller time, so it's it's a weird thing, you know.
Well, it is, but just you saying that kind of it reminds me of the movie The Howling, because one of the main, the actress, she's a werewolf. She's killing people throughout the whole thing, and then at the end, she's sitting at a diner getting a cheeseburger.
A rare cheeseburger, exactly. Fantastic movie with some of the best. When I say practical special effects.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Of the head werewolf into the wolf at the end is amazing. So
I know there's a lot of people that call it the bunny werewolf or the rabbit wolf because of those giant ears that they have on this thing.
I love it. I thought it was fantastic.
It's so cool.
And that's a deep fear, is that what defines human, and that film actually talks about that. What makes a human, and they know the people there no longer refer to themselves as humans, the community of werewolves. One of them even says that, something like, he says humans are our cattle. So he's saying like we feed on them now. We're not human anymore, even though we look human. And that's there's like that sense. And again, that whole thing is that human versus animal, we're on the cusp between the two. Winter is the time when you're on the cusp between life and death, between the spiritual and the worldly. There's like these unsettling sort of gray areas between them. The edge of the village is where you are, and you don't want to go much too farther because that represents the animalistic. They all kind of it's a similar kind of psychology again, but so that's what I would see in the thing about that story is that they are neither animal nor human. There's something different, and that's unsettling because for a lot of people that would seem unnatural. That they're not in the proper natural order anymore. There's something outside of it, and that's what a lot of these creatures also represent. Is something outside the ordained order of the universe, and they exist on the margins and in the dark places and in the shadows, and that's why they're so fearsome.
I think something that's really interesting because like often I think about a lot of just random things, on my own. Like, okay, well, why is it a werewolf? Why are werewolves so popular? And one of the things I constantly go back to or think about is how throughout history, wolves and humans didn't really get along very much. In fact, there were a lot of wolves slaughtered here in America, in early America, because of livestock being eaten.
Right.
And so it's this constant back and forth. And seeing this mashup between the wolf and the human is kind of like, here's our equalizer, the balance, the thing that really takes both, like doesn't take either side in this case. It stands alone as a separate entity saying, okay, you're both killers. Here's the ultimate predator, right? To strike fear into, especially obviously into people. But it always just fascinated me how like humanity would just so quickly kill the wolf because of the fear that they always had in wolves. And wolves rarely attack humans.
No,
it's always a livestock.
Exactly.
And today, like I'm really big in conserving wolf life. So I'm constantly following the New York Wolf Conservation, and there's so many states around the country, around the U.S. that they put out a law for a few wolves to be killed in certain areas. And so often hunters go beyond that purposely, and they don't, like, the state doesn't do anything about it. It's like, people don't care at this point whether wolves are close to being endangered or even extinct. Right. They just kill them for the sport of it, because you can't really eat a wolf. I mean, I'm sure some people do, but that's kind of weird.
Tragic.
But it's just fascinating though, the whole history behind it all. And yet, and then suddenly there's like these werewolf creatures. It's one of the most horrifying creatures ever to be created, in my opinion. There's plenty of monster movies I've seen, but every time a werewolf movie comes around, there's something that just hits deep. It's like, that's if there's a fear factor in there.
Right. Absolutely. And I think you could even make the argument that, like, as you say, wolves rarely attack humans. That's not their thing. They don't do that. And yet werewolves are savage because they're wolves, but they're driven by human savagery. It's almost like there's a sense of the human killer instinct imbues the wolf with this. So there's like this, even a postmodern argument about that. Are they innately killers, or is it because they're human to begin with that they're so bloodthirsty? Are they letting human instincts out? Is it a way of like, unleashing all of human bloodlust and everything in wolf form? No,
100%. I mean, and when you think of like, I don't know. I mean, animals, obviously they get angry, but I don't think they have angry thoughts like humans do. They don't get angry at random people. They don't
out and kill unless there's a reason.
Right. They don't start wars. Just, they don't do any of that stuff. They usually have their own little space, and the wolf pack stay to themselves most of the time. So like that's definitely really interesting, whether it's.
No, it's an interesting paradox too, isn't it? Because we talk about the fear of wolves, and you say attacking livestock and all that, and yet what is the most beloved pet of humanity is the dog,
Right.
domesticated wolf. So it's
Right.
they found a way to find common ground there with those, but there's still the fear of wolves remains, even though all dogs today are descended from wild wolves. So
Right. Is that something? But at the same time, it's like that just kind of goes to show the pride, I guess, that humanity has. Because it's like, well, we're scared of wolves. We don't like wolves. We'll kill wolves. But if we put a little of ourselves into it, make our own version of the wolf, well, now, hey,
right,
it's all good.
On them, give them a silly name, and all of a sudden they
You
sleep
know?
on the sofa and they're okay. They've been
Right.
yeah, they've been tamed, and
Yeah.
it's about the wildness. People fear their own dark side, their own wildness, so that gets projected onto anything, whether it's wolves, whether it's Christmas monsters, whether it's ghosts. There's like a fear of their own shadow selves, and I think that's it. So we can bring wolves into it as long as we tame them and give them names and pat them on the head and give them bones and whatever. Then good wolves. But the wolves that still run free are terrifying because they're not like us, you know.
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
So one of the things that I did read that I thought was really interesting, like I was surprised, I should say, less interested or interesting, more surprised by it. When I saw the title "Christmas Spiders,"
yes,
I was very much ready for like some sort of gory urban legend type story. So I was prepared. I was like, "This is gonna be crazy cool." But shockingly, it was actually very sweet compared to many of the other creature lores out there. What's very particular to me that I thought was interesting was the use of tinsel today may be the result of this particular story. So in what ways, I guess, has the Christmas spiders lore influenced modern culture, and what, like, do we have any indication as to why this story even exists?
Yeah, it's I think it's an old Ukrainian folk tale. It's like kind of Russian Slavic Ukrainian folk tale about how Christmas trees came to be decorated, and it is kind of sweet. I included it because for that I kind of wanted that as like a false thing. You're like Christmas spiders. Oh, is this going to be like a bunch of spiders burst out of a Yule log and eat everybody or something? No, it's a sweet story about. That'd be a good film though. You're like a horrifying version of the Ukrainian folk tale. But yeah, no, it's a sweet story about this poor family that doesn't have can't afford any decorations. So the spiders come and they spin their webs all around it, and they make this sort of beautiful tinsel like sort of adornment all over the trees, and it's just really sweet. It's I don't specifically know of the particular reason. I know it's a popular story in sort of Slavic speaking countries. There's Bulgarian, Ukrainian, and Russian versions of it. I think it's a lesson about poverty and being content with what you have, because you still at least have your family. You have, you can find beauty in the simplest things. And also, since spiders tend to be somewhat repulsive to a lot of people, there's this notion that there's beauty in what we might perceive as ugly as actually can be quite beautiful. And I think there's that whole lesson as well, that, spiders actually serve a purpose and people shouldn't be afraid of them unless you're living in Australia, then spiders are terrifying.
100%.
Yeah. Most spiders, you see a spider on the wall of your home, leave it alone. It'll crawl away and eat bugs. They're great to have around. So I think there's this idea, we do have a kind of innate fear of arachnids as a species. And this is that, I think it's that thing of finding some comfort and beauty in what we perceive as repulsive or ugly. So there's like, it's a dual thing about being happy in what you have and counting your blessings, but also finding the beauty in anything, actually. So I think that to me is what I think that. Now, whether that actually influenced our tinsel traditions for trees, I don't actually know. It's possible. It's certainly possible. Maybe some Russian immigrants brought the tradition with them, or Ukrainian immigrants in the 19th century. So I don't know the history of tinsel. That's an interesting thing I should look up. I don't know when that first started as adornment on trees. It's entirely possible that it has Russian or Slavic origins, definitely. Yeah.
I know, like, one of the things that I learned prior to reading your book is that finding a spider web or a spider within your Christmas tree is actually good luck to many individuals. Which, there's a lot of, especially in America, there's a lot of people who see things as bad luck. One of the big things is, of course, black cats crossing your path, especially on Halloween and stuff like that. Yeah. But what's I think is interesting is America is, when you consider this percentage of the world, America being a very small group of the overall of humanity, we're the only ones that kind of think that way. Everyone else is like, oh, black cat in front of you, good luck. Spider in your tree, good luck.
In Britain, especially, black cats are good luck to have them cross your path. In England, so yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And that's why Erik got 2 of them.
I do them. Double the luck, you know.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, no, I'm a cat guy too. We have a little tabby we love. So yeah, but yeah, it is interesting that there's traditions will morph and change from country to country and over time, and it is interesting. I know that one of the traditions in like Slavic households is buying little ornaments that are actually spider webs and putting them in your tree. So obviously the folk tradition has persisted for a long time. It's actually almost everybody will have one, like in those homes. So they put up their Christmas trees, will have one or two little spider web ornaments that they put maybe with a little spider in them. As the kind of whether it's the story or it's just become a part of the cultural mindset as well. So yeah, again, it's a good luck thing, and it's maybe it's a reminder of that tale, but it's very common in those households. So
yeah, I think, and I'm actually just thinking this right now, like it's just dawning on me, how much the spider actually, I think, influences various cultures or ideas.
Right.
When you think of Native American culture and the idea of the dream catcher,
Yeah.
which is very much the shape of a web,
Yeah.
and the idea is that that dreams or nightmares get stuck to it, much like things would to a spider web.
Absolutely.
I think that's just fascinating.
Yeah. And we talk about that. There's even in like old Nordic belief and stuff, with the concept of weird was the web of life. It is and natives talk about that too, the web of life or the weave. It's seen as almost, because spiders weave, and weaving is so important. They're often associated with women, with grandmothers, with older women, particularly. The Native Americans have a tradition of what they call grandmother spiders. So there's this notion that they are actually fountains of wisdom, and they're weaving these little webs are little works of art, basically. So that there's often a feminine associated with them as well. So, and even the name arachnid comes from the Greek myth of Arachne, the woman who was turned into a spider. So it's there's association there, but they're often seen as wise creatures around the world, rather than things to be afraid of. Again, it's Australia, but yeah.
Well, and bringing up the spider, finding the spider web in the Christmas tree, brought up. I'd never heard of this tradition either. Finding first person to find the pickle in the Christmas tree, and then you not only do you get the first gift, but it's also supposed to be luck for the rest of into the new year.
Hold on. Does somebody put the pickle in the tree, or does it naturally show up? I'm confused.
Well, I hope somebody puts the pickle in the tree.
I think there's a strong tradition, and I don't know where that specifically arises from, but there's a strong tradition, particularly in British foods, holiday foods, of putting things like, holiday puddings or pies will have like a coin or a bean or something, and the person that finds it will have maybe wins a special gift, or they'll have good luck for the whole year. So I think it's in that same tradition. It's almost like a little lottery, kind of thing, and someone puts it there, and it's meant to sort of symbolize that if you're lucky enough to find it, then that means you're going to have luck for the whole year. There's a lot of traditions about that say things like whatever happens at Christmas or on New Year's Day will follow you the whole year, because it's the time of sweeping out the old and doing the new. So whatever you do the first thing you do on New Year's Day is often very important, because it will be kind of a metaphor for what you do, for the rest of the year. So don't get too drunk and vomit or something on New Year's Day, because you're going to have a good year. So, I think the finding of the pickle is kind of like finding the coin or the bean in a Christmas pudding or in a pie or whatever. It's that kind of thing. It's the notion of you kind of won the lottery, the little spiritual lottery. So
it's interesting how like I feel like people just have this kind of draw to want to find things, and like I'm even thinking now of like Easter, how many people put chocolate Easter eggs around the house, or plastic eggs, and they go send kids out to go looking for them. I really don't know. I never looked into the lore of that. I don't know why Easter eggs, people go finding them on Easter. I don't know.
There's a lot of conflicting thoughts about that. So,
I'm sure.
Here, but but it's a similar idea. It's going looking for something, finding something. You win a prize or something. There's definitely that element. Certainly, I
guess it really just begs to humanity's curiosity.
We love mysteries. We love the unknown. We're afraid of the unknown. We love it, and I think a lot of these stories speak to that. We're terrified of the old witch that lives in the winter forest, but she also has an appeal in some ways. And this is one of the things you see in so many horror stories, in horror films. It's like, don't go into the woods, and what's the first thing the dumb ass teenager does? Is go into the woods. I'm going to take my camera and get a picture of Pumpkinhead or the whatever one of those creatures, and then they get and they're dead. The lure of the curiosity.
100%. And you know what's funny about that though is like I'm one of those people who are just like, I mean, I know I work in the movie industry, so I'm like, I know what's gonna happen. I know they're setting this up, right? And I'm still gonna sit on the couch like, don't do it, that's a dumb idea. But then I'm walking somewhere weird and I hear a noise, and what am I gonna do?
Right.
I'm gonna go investigate.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like, oh, what if that's a ghost? What if it's a monster? I gotta get this,
Right.
especially in this field that we're podcasting in, the paranormal is like naturally curious. I'm like, so many times I've gone looking for something and I realized, you know what? I'm that blonde woman who walked into the chamber of death because she was, there was the exit right there. But no, let's go deeper.
We see it even, as you say, in modern paranormal investigations. You have like whole teams of people that'll go into haunted houses or forests where Sasquatch is. But yeah, I wouldn't have the spine to do that. There's no freaking way I would go in with their microphones and their night goggles and their wait, I heard a noise over there. I think I saw something in an old house that like somebody got viciously murdered. I'm not going to do that. No freaking way. But they have the lure of the unknown. Yeah. That's, as you guys know, thing. That's one of why we're so fascinated with these things. It's almost would be disappointing if we actually found out the truth. It's the unknown is what makes it so cool, So
right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's something that I think a lot about too. Is like with the paranormal, it's all still very much speculation, like in terms of the science of it.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's ever a point in which science officially proves the paranormal, whatever that is, whether it be monsters or ghosts or otherwise, would we still have that same draw and lure to want to investigate it and understand it? Or would we be like, oh, okay, well, fun's over. Like now we know what it is.
Yeah. We'd have to find something else.
Yeah.
We love
same thing if aliens finally showed up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Part of the allure of something like that is that we don't actually know. There's some really plausible stories that people have told that are really unsettling, and it's like, well, this seems like it could actually be a thing, and that's it. But we don't have definitive proof for a lot of them. So yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's the appeal. I think it's people love the idea, but I think they love the mystery of it as much as anything. I know I do. So yeah,
right,
yeah.
All right, Tim. Well, it is that time to let you go. So I want to give the mic to you and tell everybody where they can find you, find the book.
Sure. My website's just timrayborn.com. You can find this book, Scary Book of Christmas Lore, and Barnes & Noble, any bookstore you can order it. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, it's all those places. I've got a bunch of other books as well on similar topics, paranormal topics. I write a lot about history and strange history, weird things. So yeah, go to my website, which is just timrayborn.com. And you can check out stuff there. So yeah, and I do have a sequel to this one coming out, just published yesterday, in fact, called The Scary Book of Valentine's Day Lore. And it's all about horrible love stories from all around the world and murder and betrayal and all sorts of terrible things.
I think we'll have to bring you back.
I was going to say, we'll have to have you back for Valentine's Day.
I'd love to talk about it again. That'd be great. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to put you in limbo, but stick around. Everybody, make sure you check out this book. It was so fascinating, and I loved reading all the different lore, especially since there was so much that Erik and I had never covered before. Next week is our Christmas episode, and then goes into our New Year's episode.
It all moves so fast, man. So fast.
So I hope you guys have enjoyed the episode. Grab the book, enjoy these different legends, and like we talked about last week with the scary stories, share them with your family. Make this the scary story you read to your family and converse about and stuff like that. Anything else you've got before we head out for the night?
Just if you guys, you keep tuning in, make sure you like, subscribe, share us with your friends and family as well. But let them listen to this podcast. And, we want to be in everyone's home. Definitely email us, send us messages. We'd love to interact with you guys as well. But that's it. Yeah.
All right. And again, this has been a pre-recorded show on 107.7 FM New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. Make sure I don't say paranormal. I've done it before.
I know.
Until next week, folks, where you'll find us same time, same channel. My name is Justin.
And I'm Erik. Peace.